BIONICLE, The Legend Reborn. Written by Greg Farshty. Reading by Shadowcaber. Chapter 5. Akar knew there was no time to waste. He and the other Glatorian immediately began organizing the defenses of Tessara. With the aid of Matanui and the Agori, they erected crude stone walls, mounted thornax launchers, and dug pit traps in the sand. Kina worked with the Agori, teaching them how best to use their weapons against mounted foes. "What makes you so certain the Skrull will strike here next?" Matanui asked Akar as they worked. "It's the only thing that makes sense," Akar replied. "As soon as we saw the bone hunters are working with them, a lot of things began to make sense." "Like what?" "Not long ago, the bone hunters started targeting Kina's village, Tejun," Akar explained. "Raiding trade caravans, killing Agori, doing everything they could to cut the village off from the rest of Barra Magna. Since Tejun sits on an oasis, you hurt them, you hurt everyone, because they run the water trade." "That does make sense," Matanui agreed. "After Tejun, what village has the most valuable resource?" "Equinox, to the north. They have a huge deposit of obsidian, a metal that resists wear even in the worst sandstorms. It's much prized for use in weapons. If the Skrull want to eliminate our ability to fight back, that's the most logical place to strike." "And Tessara lies right between the two villages," said Akar. "The combined Skrull Bone Hunter Legion hit Tejun, and they'll want Equinox. But they can't afford to leave Tessara sitting behind their lines. They'll be out to destroy it before they move on Equinox." Matanui heard a cheer coming from the other Glatorian. He turned to see that the walls were complete and the pits concealed. "Well done," said Terex. "We did it." "The Skrull will never know what hit them," said Gresh. "I truly hope not," thought Matanui. "But are the Skrull somewhere even now, saying the same thing about us?" That night was quiet. Kina stood guard with a group of hand-picked Agori, watching for any movement in the desert. The other Glatorian and villagers tried to rest, though sleep proved elusive for most. Bone hunters were known for making night attacks, often traveling without torches or any other means of illumination. It was frequently the case that by the time a village knew they were coming, it was too late to do anything about it. Kina was standing watch on the eastern edge of the village when she heard a sound. It was the barely audible noise of armored feet treading through sand, but it was not coming from beyond Tessara. No, it was from off to her right. Someone was slipping out of the village and into the desert. "The traitor," she said to herself. "Now I've got you." She readied her trident and moved off in the direction of the sound. In the pale glow of the village torches, she caught sight of an Agori walking swiftly away from Tessara. Doing her best to stay silent, she followed. Kina caught up to the Agori just as he reached the Tessara hot springs. Seizing him from behind, she spun him around. In the moonlight, she could clearly see who it was, and she was not a bit surprised. "I have to admit, I was hoping I was wrong," Kina said. "Don't move, traitor." Barracks looked up at her, panic in his eyes. "What? No, you've got it all wrong. I was following—" A soft voice came from behind the Glatorian. "He was following me." Barracks and Kina both turned at the sound. "You?" said Kina in surprise. The shadows around them began to move. The next instant, a dozen Skrull and bone hunters closed in on them, weapons primed and ready. "And this is how you block Assertivist double strike," Akar said, showing off a defensive move it had taken him years to master. Terex, Vastus, Gresh, and Matanui looked on, suitably impressed. Of the lot, only Terex was agile enough to duplicate the maneuver, and even he doubted he could do it without lots of practice. The demonstration was interrupted by Metis. "Akar! Matanui!" he shouted. "The Skrull have kidnapped Barracks and Kina." "What? How?" said Akar. Now Ranu rushed up to the group. "I saw them too," he said. "They were being dragged away through the hot springs." "We must go after them," said Motunui, before they get too far. We cannot leave them to the mercies of the Skrull. Agreed, said Akar. I'm going with you, said Gresh. My wound is healed. I'm ready. By now, the whole village was roused. The Agori crowded around the Glatorian. Some wondered aloud what was going on, while those who knew looked at the Glatorian with worry on their faces. No, said Ranu. You can't leave us. Don't you see? This is just what the Bone Hunters and the Skrull want. They'll lead you away, then wipe us out. Just like Tejun. He's right, an Agori villager shouted. You have to stay, said another. The cry was picked up by the rest of the crowd, born of panic and unreasoning fear. I understand your feelings, Motunui said to the assembled Agori, but we cannot turn our backs on our friends. Kina is just one Glatorian, Ranu answered, and Barracks is a worthless thief. Everyone knows that. No one is worth sacrificing, no matter how small, said Motunui. We stand together as a team. So you'd leave us defenseless? Demanded Ranu. A fine thing. We trusted you with our lives, and you repay us with betrayal. Motunui looked at Akar and Gresh, then back at Ranu. I was once forced to abandon my own people. I will not do so again. The Glatorian will remain here. I will go after Barracks and Kina, alone. No, said Gresh, you can't. One being alone, even you, Motunui, against a horde of Skrull and Bone Hunters, said Akar. It would be suicide, my friend, and it would help Barracks and Kina not at all. Motunui held up his hand to silence them. We will see each other again, I promise you. Then he turned and walked out of the village. Let me go with him, Gresh said to Akar. He doesn't stand a chance alone. Akar watched his friend disappear into the darkness. The last glint of moonlight reflected off the shell of Click, perched on its master's shoulder. He's not alone, the Glatorian said. Dawn found Akar climbing a rise toward a great petrified tree stump. Motunui sat atop the stump, deep in meditation. I thought I might find you up here, said Akar gently. Motunui smiled. Thank you, Akar, for everything. Akar shook his head. I should be thanking you. I'd lost faith in others and myself. The Glatorian held a rolled-up piece of parchment out to Motunui. Here, this might help. Motunui spread the parchment out. It was a map of the world of Bara Magna. Akar pointed to a spot in the northeast, labeled Roxtus on the map. My guess is they'll be there, said Akar. Barracks may not be a valuable prisoner, but Kina is. Of all of us, she's the only one who ever came close to beating a Skrull in the arena. They'll make her the star of one of their matches, before they kill her. Motunui could hear what Akar was leaving unsaid. Kina meant a lot to the Glatorian. It was tough on him, leaving her safety in the hands of someone else. But the alternative would be rebellion by the Agori, or worse, their surrender to the Skrull. I wish I could go with you, said Akar. I know. You're ready. Pointing down to Tisara, he added, The question is, are they? Motunui followed his gaze. Down below, the Agori were laboring to pull their two massive shelters together. Two structures separated by an arena were more vulnerable to a divide-and-conquer Skrull attack. One could be more easily defended. Uniting the two halves of Tisara is a start, said Motunui. Let's hope the rest of the villages survive long enough to join us, Akar answered. Akar suddenly feinted a jab at Motunui's face. Motunui moved like lightning, bringing his hand up to block Akar's fist. Akar burst out laughing. You've learned well, my friend, he said, slapping Motunui on the back. I had a great teacher, Motunui replied, smiling. A great boom suddenly rocked the desert. Motunui and Akar looked down below to see that the Agori had succeeded in uniting the two shelters into one. While both large metal structures had looked impressive before, Connected together, they were a formidable sight that might even make a Skrull hesitate before invading. But their new appearance had an even more profound effect on Motunui. His eyes widened slightly, and he gasped. Now he knew why the huge shelters had looked so familiar to him. It had been right in front of him all along, but with all that had been going on, he hadn't seen it. "Incredible," he whispered. "What is it?" asked Akar. Motunui wanted to shout the answer to the skies. It was amazing, wonderful. It could be the key to his regaining his lost universe. But now was not the time to reveal what he had learned to Akar, not when the Glatorian faced such a serious threat. When the Skrull were defeated, there would be time to share his revelation. "I will explain later," he said, beginning his descent back down the mountain. Akar watched him go, wondering what had gotten into his friend. Sure, seeing the shelters coming together was a good start, inspiring even, but hardly incredible. Well, sometimes there was no figuring out Motunui, he thought, and that was to be expected. He was from a completely different world, after all. Will he ever make it back home? Akar asked himself. I know that's what he wants, but I am not so sure Barra Magna can stand to lose him. Roxtus was the largest village in all of Barra Magna, big enough to be called a city. Home to the Skrull warriors and the rock tribe Agori, it was a place few had visited even before the war had begun. The Skrull were not friendly or particularly good hosts. Most of the Glatorian or Agori who wound up there did so against their will, having been captured by bone hunters and sold into slavery in Roxtus. Since the attack on Atero, of course, no one had dared come within miles of Roxtus if they could avoid it. The city was an armed camp, with Skrull troops drilling for a planned campaign and Agori guards talking about how they wish they could be there to watch the other villages fall. Outside the walls, bone hunters scoured the desert, watching for Agori spies and Glatorian raiders. Kina and Barracks were getting a look at life inside Roxtus. Hanging in a cage suspended high in the air, Barracks was starting to think they might have been better off buried under the Scopio. It didn't help that Kina had decided their captivity was all his fault, not to mention that she was still angry about his activities in the Tejun cave. It was my cavern, she insisted for the third time. You should have stayed out of it. Oh, really? Your cavern? Snapped Barracks. You stole it. You're a thief just like me. No, said Kina. And I thought you said you were a collector, you little weasel. Aha, now she remembers. How things change when the metal claw is on the other foot. That doesn't even make sense, Kina sputtered. Look, that cavern was my secret place, my private sanctuary from all the ugliness outside. Can you understand that? Barracks looked at the expression in Kina's eyes and suddenly felt all the anger drain out of him. Barra Magna wasn't the easiest place to live. Probably everyone needed some kind of an escape. For him, it was collecting. For Kina, the cave and her dreams of someday getting off this planet. Most other Glatorian just threw themselves into training non-stop as a way of ignoring the harsh realities of life in the desert. Yeah, I can, Barracks said, after a long moment. I've got feelings too, you know. And by the way, I didn't steal them. Kina actually smiled warmly at Barracks. He couldn't believe it. No, she said. You just collected them. Barracks smiled back. Didn't you ever think that maybe you weren't the only one who needed to believe that there was something more? Kina didn't reply, just looked away. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Barracks had never seen Kina so vulnerable before. He had to admit that he was guilty of the same thing as she. He had never bothered to think about her feelings. Maybe if they had stopped shouting at each other for a minute, they might have settled the cave issue between them long ago. I've got an idea, he offered. Maybe we could share the cavern? It could be our secret place. I mean, once the Glatorian rescue us. They are going to rescue us, aren't they? Kina gestured at the fortress in which they were held prisoner, bristling as it was with armed Skrull and Agori. Look where we are, Barracks. I wouldn't count on it. Barracks' smile disappeared. Then suddenly it was back again, twice as bright as before. Yeah? Well then, what's that? He said, pointing towards the gate. Kina looked down. Matanui, shield in hand, was walking into the city of Roxtus. Mounted bone hunters rode behind him, prodding him towards the central arena. But this was no prisoner they were escorting, that was obvious. His head was held high. Hearing the commotion, Tuma, leader of the Skrull, stepped out of his shelter and walked to the center of the arena. He stood still, sizing Matanui up as the hero approached. Tuma had heard stories about this one from the bone hunters who survived the Scopio fight. He had been prepared to credit this new Glatorian with skill and daring, but obviously the warrior was lacking in sense if he walked into Roxtus alone. This stranger will learn a lesson, thought Tuma, and a painful one. He walked into my city. He will not be walking out again. End of Chapter 5.